Hi everybody, welcome back to Age Gap Love Story. This is episode 6 about dealing with the public and strangers when you're in an age gap relationship. We are Carrie
And Alan.
And we're a married couple with a 32-and-a-half-year age difference, and we started this podcast and YouTube channel to offer information, support, and community to help make your age gap relationship successful. And as I mentioned, we are going to be talking about some of the challenges of dealing with the public and with strangers, and we actually have a recent situation that we encountered that we're going to talk about. And I'm also just going to mention, as always, we're not experts, we're not therapists or psychologists. We did actually not find a ton of information on this subject, but I did find some research, and I will talk about that, and I will link to any relevant articles in the show notes or in the description below. So I hope you can find helpful information there. And we are just going to jump right into it. I think maybe we should talk about what kind of situations that we've been in or what you may be in where you would encounter having to deal with the public and strangers. So do you want to talk about that?
No. Yes, I do, of course. Talk about anything. Just give me the mic. It can be a difficult circumstance with respect to strangers because when the age gap is obvious, you certainly will draw stares. When you're in an environment where people are not accustomed to seeing you, and that can be when you're shopping, dining, on a vacation, or in any circumstance around people that really don't know you. Hopefully, when people do know you as a couple, they'll be a great deal more comfortable. So in dealing with those circumstances, I think it's important to remain cool, not to become angry, not to push back, and Carrie will discuss that in more detail momentarily. So we'll turn the mic back over to her. Also, we're going to talk about family, right? Or have we already covered family?
We already covered that.
We already covered family.
Yeah, right now we're just talking about situations where you would encounter these situations. So, for instance, when you go out to dinner, Alan and I have noticed, and I would just say, if you're not watching the video, Alan and I are both Caucasian, and so I think it's easy for people to just assume that we are father and daughter. And to be completely honest, we don't necessarily fight against that assumption because it's just easier. If people just want to think that and that makes them happy and doesn't push their, boundaries and make them uncomfortable, whatever. So we just kind of go along with it. Now I know some people are more, I don't know, maybe you're more self-confident or you're more rebellious, how you want to name yourself. If you are more, like you want to make sure people know exactly who you are and that you are a relationship, you're not, father and daughter or mother and daughter, that's fine. That's totally up to you. But Alan and I are a little bit more, I don't know, we're kind of introverted anyways, and we don't like conflict, and we don't really necessarily want to draw attention or negative attention to ourselves. So we just find it easier, like, fine, as I said, whatever. If you want to think that we're father and daughter, that's fine with you. So we do find that going out to lunch is much easier. We don't get stares. People just make their assumption. But then when we used to live in Los Angeles, now we live a few hours away from Los Angeles, but when we lived in LA and we would go out for dinner, especially on like a Valentine's Day, I mean, obviously we're not father and daughter. And so then we would draw more attention and more stares. And I personally did not like it. I find that to be very uncomfortable. I don't like being stared at. So other situations that we thought about were, as Alan mentioned, traveling, because, you're not really, as an adult, you don't really travel like father and daughter so much. Work, social events, of course, with quarantine, we're not really doing any social events. So But I'm sure in the future, and if you're listening to this in the future and we're no longer in quarantine, then these may be more applicable. But parties, concerts, things where you wouldn't necessarily be out with a like your dad, and where it's more obvious that you'd be with a partner. These are the types of situations we're talking about. Also, social media, and that relates to the story that we want to share with you. I guess we could maybe jump into the story, but Alan wants to say something.
I find dealing with tense situations, it's often best if you can to use a little humor or to say something that's a little surprising. For example, on occasion when people say, "Oh, is that your younger daughter?" And I'll say, "Well, actually, I'm a grandfather." And that usually elicits a blank look on people's face, those that don't know us. Now I'll let Carrie continue.
I'm giving Alan a look because he's not following the script that we put together. So we came up with about, I think, 7 challenges that you may face when dealing with the public and strangers. And I'm just going to share this story because I've referenced it a few times already now. But what happened is recently with the launch of this podcast, I was approached by a journalist, and over social media, she saw that I had tagged one of our Instagram posts with age gap, and she told me she was looking for a couple to feature in an age gap story. And so she was a British journalist, and I thought, well, we could use with some media attention because we don't have a budget to pay for marketing. And so I went ahead and answered her questions. Alan helped me. She was very polite. She gave us some questions to fill out. And so we did that, and I gave her some photos. Anyways, the long story short is she did have the story printed. She was able to get it picked up by a bunch of outlets in British Columbia, or not British Columbia, in the United Kingdom. And it turns out they were more kind of tabloid type publications, and they did not twist our words or anything. They printed pretty much exactly what we wrote, but I don't know, it had kind of a salacious type of title, and I can link to the article if you guys want to check it out. But the bottom line is that it drew a lot of comments. I mean, like hundreds of comments. And I learned my lesson pretty quickly that you do not read the comments if you're ever featured in a tabloid story or any kind of mass journalism. Note to self, do not read the comments because they were horrible. Some of them were really amazing and sweet and kind, and the types of things you would expect when people are decent and saying, like, if your love story is heartwarming, I wish you the best. And then the mean comments were everything that you can imagine, just horrible stuff. And so the bottom line is that this is a type of challenge. I mean, this story kind of covers a lot of the challenges. It's stereotyping, it's rudeness, it's insults, it's isolation, all, because I felt really kind of bad for about 24 hours after that story came out, just because I didn't even read all the comments. I read a few of them, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I guess I just wanted to share this story it was funny because we were planning to do this topic, and then this situation happened, and it made me have to realize all the pieces of advice that we're going to share today. So it was like something in action.
To continue on that topic, a number of the comments that were negative that we received were on the topic of what I would call, is she a gold digger? And that's something that I'm sure will be common if you have an age gap relationship where one of the two of you has more financial resources than the other. One of the comments was spiteful with respect to Carrie's appearance, that she didn't really look like she was 45. She looked like she was much older. Another was a negative comment on her hair, which was ridiculous. And I didn't receive any comments on my age, although I have been told at 78, I really don't look a day over 77, which I consider very flattering. Would you like to continue?
Yeah, or we can just jump into these negative
Okay.
and how we might deal with it.
All right. How we would deal with it is basically by not giving the other person the satisfaction of responding with a negative comment. Don't empower their negative attitude by responding with some sort of a retort that's angry. Just say, oh, okay, I appreciate your opinion. We can agree to disagree, or I understand how you might think that. And even if they are family or friends, you have to appreciate that if you're having a negative response, likely you're not going to be able to change their mind. So you have to kind of move on and deal with it, and don't give any value or acceptance to their comment. You know, it's best, although you don't have to ignore it, you can acknowledge it, but don't accept it, and don't give them an opportunity to fight back. Just sort of take the wind out of their sails by saying, "Oh, I understand. Okay, that's fine."
So in addressing this issue of specifically dealing with negative stereotyping, because that was our first kind of situation that you might deal with strangers in the public, is stereotype. So as Alan mentioned, it's that the younger person is a gold digger, that the older partner is maybe just looking for a physical relationship, you know, whatever. Oh, here's another one, that the younger one has daddy issues, quote unquote, whatever that means. I have had a few people reach out to me on Instagram who said that they have also had to deal with that stereotype. And I mean, it's just really amazing what people will come up with when they're being judgmental. And we can talk a little bit more about that a little bit later, of dealing with social media. But again, with this idea of that you're being stereotyped, whether you're the younger partner or the older partner, as Alan mentioned, you understand that these people don't know you. A stranger, somebody in the public, they don't know you, and you are an individual. You are your own person. You are not a stereotype. You can just live your life, be genuine, follow your dreams, be your own person, and you don't have to fall into this stereotype of what people think you are, because you know it's not true. I think the second challenge that you can come across with dealing with the strangers and the public is this, we kind of touched on this, but negative comments, or you can have to deal with open hostility, resentment, or disapproval. And I know particularly in age gap relationships where you have an interracial component, or you are gay, so you're of the same sex, and so people may even be more horribly rude and discriminatory. And unfortunately, we live in the United States where, you know, it's legal. Gay marriage is legal. Of course, age gap relationships are legal when assuming both partners are of legal age. And so, you know, Alan and I think both agree that everybody has the freedom to choose their partner, to choose who they love, and nobody has the right to discriminate against you according to the law. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, but you just have to remember that, you know, this is your right, this is your individual choice, and we never want you to put yourself at risk, but we do want you to remember that this is your choice.
To share another personal experience with you, how this might impact your personal and social life. We used to live in a gated community. I wouldn't say it was a retirement community. It was a golf community centered around a beautiful golf course, although we tried golf and it didn't really work for us. But we felt a bit of isolation. And at first we thought it was because we didn't play golf, and virtually all the social activities were related to those that were active golfers. And then we became aware of the fact that because most of the people in this community were, I would say, in the mid-50s all the way up, to maybe 70s, 80s, and there was only one other that we were aware of, age gap and interracial marriage. And we would see those folks from time to time while we were walking in our community, although we weren't really friendly with them. But we found that the other folks that were more normal older couples, they excluded us from social events, and there were actually quite a few. And we began to realize it was not because we didn't golf. I think it was because of our age gap situation. So it didn't hurt us because, again, Carrie is sort of an introvert, and I guess I am to a degree. And we're very happy together, and we have friends outside of the community where we lived. But it is something you take note of.
Right, so that is also a point that we're going to cover about this sense of isolation. But going back to my second point, which was dealing with negative comments, I also wanted to talk briefly about a style of communication that I learned about from a therapist, and it's called nonviolent communication. And I can link to a website that's called the Center for Nonviolent Communication if you are interested. I find this topic really fascinating, and nonviolent communication is a whole thing. You can actually become certified in it. But I would say the type of communication that I use is like non-confrontational communication. And so if somebody, for instance, says to you, like, is that your dad? Or what? Something rude like that. Rather than getting defensive, so I guess the type of communication that I like to use would be called non-defensive communication, which also is kind of a version of this nonviolent communication. But the idea is that you diffuse the situation rather than escalating it. So if somebody makes a rude comment, all you do is you kind of like you acknowledge them, and you just say something that's very benign. So you say something like, that's your opinion. I never thought of that before. That's interesting. Or, you're very observant. But with no sarcasm, no resentment. It's really difficult, but you can practice it. And in a way, it gives you power because you're then taking control of the situation and you're bringing down the temperature. So I just wanted to throw that out there. This idea of non-defensive communication is something that I learned from a therapist, and specifically, like I had mentioned that I deal with emotionally immature parents. I did with both my mom and my dad, and actually this non-defensive communication is a way of dealing with like people who are like that. So whether that's a boss or a parent or anyone, or the public or strangers, you can use this non-defensive communication, and I think it's really effective and it's very empowering. So I'd encourage you to look into that. So the third situation would be stares, insults, jibes, slights, or whispers. So this is a little bit different from negative comments or open hostility. This is when you're out and people are giving you the side eye, they're staring, they're whispering. You can see them talking to each other. And I think this is a great situation, as Alan referenced earlier, about using humor. Because in this situation, you're not dealing with somebody who's potentially explosive. You're dealing with somebody who's just being rude or ignorant. And so I think the most important thing, though, is that you don't let yourself get angry. Do you want to say anything?
Yes, I mentioned earlier, as you know, I'm a little nutty when it comes to my type of humor, but although Carrie doesn't like it when I do things like this, I can remember a visit to our dermatologist, and they have a new medical assistant who ushered both of us, because we usually go into the examining room at the same time. I mean, there's no discovery left. Anyway, so the medical assistant said, "Do you want to go first, or you want your daughter to go first?" I said, "She's not my daughter. I'm actually her parole officer." Carrie didn't like that, but I got a stare from the medical assistant. And a few minutes later, when the doctor came in, do you know that medical assistant wanted to know if you were really Carrie's parole officer? In any case, that's the way I kind of address those issues, or I overlook them. But we don't encounter that many at this point in our relationship, because we do associate with people that we know, that we like, or when we go out to a restaurant or some other venue, it's usually where they know who we are. And Carrie is such a pleasant and sweet person. We've never really had issues where people are spiteful directly to us unless they're strangers.
Yeah, but I do think it's because we haven't really been traveling much lately because of the virus. So, because travel is really, I think that's when we encounter it the most now, especially when we go on a cruise or we're in like a romantic location like Hawaii. That's one of our favorite places to go. I mean, because otherwise, when we're just out in public in the town where we live, again, it's like people just assume Alan is my dad. When we're shopping, when we're at restaurants for lunch, just when we're out walking in the neighborhood. I'm just like 99% sure.
Would you like to hear some Hawaiian music?
Okay. Anyways, you can see dealing with Alan is like dealing with a child sometimes. So the bottom line is I do think we encounter it. It's just that we haven't recently because we haven't really been going out for the last 4 months. Maybe that's why we're getting a little crazy here. So, okay, let's move on now to going kind of back actually to dealing with negative comments in the media. And so I'm sure not a lot of you are having tabloid articles written about you, and that's something that I never thought would happen to me. But social media, of course, we usually all are on social media, and that can be a place where you encounter rude comments. Now, I'm sure you've had this experience, but on places like Facebook and Instagram, it's easy to block and report people, and I do that a lot. I have zero tolerance for rudeness or things like that. But of course, on a like this tabloid situation, they have a private website where they posted the article, and people can just people have to register, but they can just give a fake name and stuff. And it wasn't like anybody was moderating the comments. So in that situation, I think ignoring that is the best situation. Like the stuff that people were saying about, I was a gold digger or whatever. They don't know me. They have no idea of who I am, of what our situation is. Um, they probably have no idea that I'm a business owner, that I'm independent. They just have no clue. And so why even get into that argument? So it did bother me, but maybe it's because I was naive and had never really encountered that before. And I will say also that, I know you, if you're listening, Alan and I have been together for 22 years now. So it's not like we're at the beginning of our relationship. A lot of this stuff we have a thick skin to now. And I know if you're in a new age gap relationship, maybe you haven't developed that thick skin, but I hope that you understand that it's other people's ignorance. It's not you. It's not a reflection on you. It's a reflection on them. Do you want to say anything?
Yes. It's difficult to appreciate this point of view, but you can only control yourself. You can't control other people. I think it's always best to try to kill people with kindness, to use that old expression, and hopefully that'll soften the edge on their attitudes. But if not, then overlook it. And I don't think either of us want to exaggerate this point, but early on in an age gap love story, it can be disruptive, it can be helpful, it can cause you to question your relationship, and unfortunately may lead to a breakup. So you just need to be mindful that you don't live your life for other people, whether it's family, friends, or whatever. And if they really love you, they'll want what you want. And if you're happy, they should be happy.
You said it can be helpful. I think you meant it can be hurtful. Yeah. Anyways.
Well, some people like to be hurt.
And when Alan said kill him with kindness, I think one example that I have is because I have a food blog, as you may know, it's called cleaneatingkitchen.com. And sometimes I get comments on there where people say, this recipe was awful. And now that's kind of a situation where I say, sometimes I want to know, like, well, why was it awful? But if it's something really like, well, I replaced this with that, and then I cooked it at this time instead of that time, and boy, this recipe sucked. Then, what am I supposed to do? So usually an example of like killing them with kindness is I'll say, thanks for your feedback, and just let it go at that. And I also wanted to share a quote with you that I found when I was kind of, I guess, reeling from reading those negative comments online. And it helped me. And so I thought it might help you if you're dealing with this. And the quote comes from an author, and I don't think I can pronounce his name, so I won't try to, but I will put his name in the references. But the quote is, when they judge you, yawn. When they misunderstand you, smile. When they underestimate you, laugh. When they condemn you, ignore. When they envy you, rejoice. And when they oppose you, prevail. And I just love that so much. It gave me, it makes me feel empowered, and I hope it does for you too. So we have 3 more points we wanted to talk about, and this sense of isolation when dealing with the public or strangers, or even family, whatever makes you feel isolated. I think when Alan shared that story about how we used to live in this gated community and we felt like we just found it difficult to make friends, but I think when we dug a little bit further, because even though we didn't play golf, we realized that I think it's because we're introverts, we actually weren't making a huge attempt to make friends. We almost like protected ourselves by not putting ourselves out there. So rather than being rejected, we didn't even put ourselves out there. But then as we lived in this development longer, we started doing more activities. For instance, we joined the fitness center, and then we started making friends, and people got to know us as individuals and as a couple. And then I think we felt just fine. Even though we didn't want to play golf, we felt like we fit in. We started going to more social events and things like that.
One thing I did notice at this gated community was that as we did make friends and we had more exposure to some of the other people that lived there through this fitness center, there was an explosion in the number of women that had facelifts. Do you remember that?
I don't know.
No? Oh, well. In any case, it was an experience. And as Carrie said, we did make some friends at the fitness center, but I must confess that on rare occasion did that lead to being social with these people. Occasionally we would get invited to like a little get together when somebody was leaving the community that we knew. But still, I think we were isolated, even though we were treated with courtesy by those that came to know us.
Well, I disagree. I think that if you're in this situation and you have a type of organization that you're passionate about, whether it's your church or it's a nonprofit or it's something, I guess the bottom line is that don't be afraid of people rejecting you. Have the confidence to to go out there and to try to meet people and let people get to know you. And if people don't want to get to know you, it's their loss. But you shouldn't feel isolated, and you don't have to feel alone for being in an age gap relationship. It might take a little bit more effort for people to accept you, but if you're a nice person and you and your partner love each other, people like that. People like to be around people who are happy and kind. And so, lean into that.
If you do feel isolated or you do feel stressed, shoot us an email, contact us, or rerun some of our episodes. We would like to pick you up emotionally as well as inform you. And if you're with a person that you really like, believe me, life is wonderful. And that's certainly better than the negativism and the criticism that you're going to get from others who won't let you be happy.
Right. And I don't think we necessarily, I don't want to like dwell on this, but if somebody is really rude and we kind of mention that it says more about them than you, but that's true. Maybe that person is really hurting. Maybe they're going through a divorce. Maybe they've had not good relationships, and then seeing you in a happy relationship irritates them. So the next point is, while you may feel isolated from strangers in the public and kind of social, you can also experience rejection from family and friends. And I know this can be really painful. I think I've experienced that, and it was at least partially tied to our age gap relationship. And I'm not sure how much of it was tied to that, or if those relationships were weak anyways. But nobody wants to be rejected, but it can happen. And I know it can be extremely painful. And I would say that family therapy can be an option, or individual therapy. I've always chosen to go the individual therapy route. I've always wanted to work on myself and make myself as strong as I can be. I think I had a lot of work because of I think I missed out on opportunities to build my self-esteem when I was growing up. And so I've had to do a lot of work on myself. But family therapy is an option. I think also just having patience with your family and friends to let them get to know your partner. Sometimes they just need some time, and even though you're 100% convinced that this person is amazing, your family they don't know your partner as well as you do, and they need some time to adjust.
And an offshoot on this discussion, or an alternate point of view, is that if you are frozen out, then create your own environment. For example, at the holidays, if having the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, whatever your holiday may be, with family, if that doesn't work for whatever reason, whether you're frozen out or they just have a different approach or live at a distance, whatever the case may be, create your own tradition. Carrie and I have done that, and we either travel to a favorite place during the holidays, or often we'll just be home together. And because we enjoy each other's company so much, we really don't feel a sense of loss. Maybe we'll go out on a holiday or just be home together. So you modify your environment and make it comfortable for you.
Right. So going back to this other point of rejection from friends or family, I also wanted to give you the permission that it's okay to break off a relationship even with a family member. I know that's a little bit dramatic, but you do have permission. Just because somebody's your family and they're incredibly rude to you doesn't mean that you have to continue that relationship. And I think this is probably a situation where working with a therapist could be really helpful, because um, you know not a lot of people talk about breaking off relationship with their family. It happens all the time, and it's okay, especially if we're talking about your mental health and your emotional health. If somebody just continues to bring you down and hurt you, then you have to do what's best for you. Um, and then this last point is feeling this just loss of contact with your friends and your family who disapprove of your age gap relationship, and how to deal with that. And as Alan mentioned, you can create some new traditions, and this idea of making a new family with your friends who make you feel good. I mean, we have relationships because they bring more to our lives and positivity and experience and perspective. And if your family doesn't do that to you, for you, then you make a new family of people who you want to see and who bring you up and make you feel good and approve of you. And I think this can really help deal with this just negativity that can come from being in a relationship where there's a large age difference.
To sort of wind this up, I'd like to share two other experiences I had in the past that relate to age gap situations that you might find interesting, maybe even funny. When Carrie and I moved into a house, in fact, in this golf community, we were having an audiovisual system hooked up for us, and the technician that came to do it brought his two children, and the daughter was, oh, I guess she was about 12 or so, and the son was about 9 or 8. There was a bit of a gap there. And so I was talking with them while the technician was doing the install, and the little boy said something. He said, "Does this belong to your little girl?" Because I was showing them around the house. And I said, "She's not my little girl." I said, "She's my wife." And the little boy went, he didn't know what to say. And his sister went, shh, 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 like that. So I remember that as a funny experience. And then the other one I'll share with you, which didn't relate to Carrie and I, but when I was about, I think 10 or 11, my dad, who is the youngest in a large family, had an older brother who at this particular time many years ago was already in his early 80s. He lived to his mid to late 90s. Anyway, he was kind of a philanderer, if I can use that expression. I don't think his wife really cared. Uh, anyway, so on a visit, my mid 80-year-old Uncle Sam was talking to my brother and I. I was 10 and my brother was like 16 at the time. And so he said, "What's new, Uncle Sam?" And he said, "I've got a new girlfriend." Now, that could have been somebody that maybe he would go out for lunch with, or who knows what, or went to a bridge club meeting with. Anyway, so I looked at my brother. My brother looked at me, and so my brother said, "What do you mean, that new girlfriend?" And he said, "It is a new girlfriend, and she is really young." So my brother said, "How young?" He said, "She's 64. Now, for my uncle who was in his mid-80s, that was, quite a gap. I looked at my brother and we kind of rolled our eyes and thought, 64 is young. Anyway, that was my first exposure to sort of an age gap situation, and I just had to share that with you.
And I just remembered one time when we were in the car with your daughter and your grandsons, and the little one who's now 20 or around there, he was maybe 3 or 2, and he said, "Mommy," he was talking to Alan's daughter. She said, "Yes." He said, "Is Carrie your mommy?" And and she said, "No, we talked about this. Um, Grandma is my mommy, and Carrie is married to Grandpa." But it was just really funny. And so, giving people some grace, letting them get used to you, and just trusting in, your love that you have for your partner, I think is a good way to go. And trusting in yourself, too, in your decision.
Right. And there is a huge difference, as I'm sure you're aware, between remarks made in ignorance and remarks made in malice. And you'll be able to distinguish them, I'm sure, immediately.
Yeah. So on that note, we hope that you found this episode helpful. We hope that you are subscribed to our channel and our podcast, and that you give us a review on Apple Podcasts, because apparently that is the best way for Apple to know that they should show our podcast to other potential listeners. So please do that. And if we get some comments or reviews, we would love to share some of them in the future.
Hope you liked our show.
All right, bye everybody. See you next time.